The city skyline had always felt like a promise to me. A promise I'd made to myself long before anyone else ever believed in me. For years, I had been climbing, clawing, and scraping my way through a world that seemed to delight in reminding me of what I didn't have. My brother, Nathan, had never struggled. Everything had been handed to him on a silver platter, and he believed the world owed him more. I, on the other hand, had earned every small victory, every late night triumph, and every whispered compliment behind closed doors. That's why, when I finally signed the papers for the Tribeca Penthouse, I did it quietly, deliberately, savoring the moment alone. The apartment was a masterpiece. Floor-to-ceiling windows that drank in the Hudson's glow, a terrace that felt like it could hold the sky itself, and interiors that whispered elegance without screaming opulence. I had dreamt of this place for years, imagining myself in it not as an inheritance's beneficiary, but as someone who had built her own life, piece by piece. I wanted Nathan to see me not as the sister who'd always been in his shadow, but as someone untouchable in her independence. I had called my lawyer a week ago, insisting on secrecy. No family meetings, no casual mentions in passing. Just a signed document, a down payment, and a key that felt heavier than any chain I'd ever carried. Even now, as I stood in the empty living room, letting my eyes wander across the polished floors, I felt a twinge of fear. Nathan had a way of turning joy into accusation. He had always believed that whatever I earned or achieved somehow diminished his share of life, even when it didn't touch him in the slightest. The thought of telling him made my stomach twist. I knew that the moment he saw the apartment, he would scream, accuse, maybe even try to undermine me. And yet there was a small, fierce part of me that wanted him to see it. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I needed him to understand that I could carve my own path. That I didn't need to fight over scraps from the family table, that I could rise without stepping on him, but also without waiting for his permission. I wandered through the rooms, brushing my hands along the smooth marble counters, tracing the outline of the fireplace. In the silence, memories came rushing in. The nights Nathan had mocked my ambitions, the endless comparisons to his achievements, the way he had always believed I was beneath him. I had learned long ago not to argue, not to defend myself. The words never landed. But this place, this penthouse, was my answer. It was my declaration in solid steel and glass that I had arrived. As I stepped out onto the terrace, the city lights flickering like a million tiny candles beneath me, I allowed myself a quiet laugh. A laugh that was half disbelief, half triumph. I had done it. I had purchased a dream that no one could take away, especially not Nathan. And yet, deep down, I knew that the real challenge was about to begin. Because while the keys in my hand felt like victory, I couldn't ignore the storm that would come when he found out. The thought of his outrage, the scream that I could already hear echoing in my mind, made my pulse quicken. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it fully, the sweet, nervous thrill of anticipation, of knowing that my life had finally shifted, and that Nathan's world was about to be reminded uncomfortably of my existence. I had hoped I could delay the inevitable, maybe a week, maybe a month, long enough for Nathan to be distracted, for the storm to pass without touching me. But hope, I had learned, was a luxury when it came to him. It wasn't even subtle. He smelled opportunity, or in his case, perceived theft, from a mile away. It was late afternoon when he appeared at my door. I hadn't even had time to arrange flowers or hang my art. He was standing there, eyes wide, nostrils flaring, as though the sight of me standing in my own home had physically shocked him. "You bought this." His voice was more a growl than a question, carrying the kind of accusation that could cut through steel. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice even steady. I didn't flinch when he stepped inside uninvited, his shoes clicking against the marble floor, marking his intrusion. "I bought it. I've been working toward it for years. It's mine, mine," he roared, the single word echoing off the high ceilings like a gunshot. "You can't. You stole it. That's our inheritance." I froze for a heartbeat, taken aback not by his anger, but by the intensity of his delusion. Our inheritance had never been about apartments or penthouses. It had been about his belief that life owed him everything, and my work didn't matter. "I didn't steal anything," I said carefully, This is my money, my work. You think inheritance is a right. No, it's a gift, and I've made my own way." Nathan laughed then, a harsh, brittle sound, more bitter than amusement. "You've always been the cunning one," he sneered. "Always finding a way to look better, smarter, but this is beyond. You've crossed a line. You've humiliated me, humiliated you." I repeated, my voice rising now, but still tempered with control. "I didn't do this to humiliate you. I did this for me. And if you feel humiliated, maybe that's because you've been living your life waiting for someone else to build it for you." His face twisted, veins standing out along his temples. "You don't get it. This was supposed to be mine. Mom and Dad would have wanted me to have this, not you. You're selfish, always thinking about yourself." For a moment, I wanted to argue, to point out every time he had wasted opportunities, squandered advantages, and relied on luck and charm while I worked silently for decades. But I didn't, because I realized in that exact moment that words wouldn't reach him. They never did. His entitlement was a wall, impenetrable and cold. So I stood there, watching the storm rage across his face, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and resolve. He wasn't just angry about an apartment, he was angry that the world had finally shifted in my favor, and that he couldn't control it. And in his rage, I sensed something deliciously potent, an opening. I took a slow breath and said softly, almost too calmly, "If this bothers you so much, Nathan, maybe it's time you learned what it feels like to earn something for yourself. Not everything comes to you because you think it should." The words hit him like a whip. I saw his jaw tighten, his lips press together, but for the first time, there was hesitation. The fire in his eyes didn't dim, but it flickered, as though he was realizing this wasn't going to be easy. And in that hesitation, I knew the game had begun, because he was furious, yes, but he was also vulnerable. And revenge, if crafted correctly, would be sweet. I stepped back toward the terrace, letting the light spill over me, as Nathan's shouts filled the space. I let him have the fury. I didn't need to fight back yet. Not today. Today, I simply smiled, and waited. The thrill of triumph is often quieter than the storm that precedes it. Nathan's furious outburst had been expected, but the aftermath, the subtle unraveling of his composure, was far sweeter than any shout or accusation could have been. I watched carefully, deliberately, as he stumbled through his entitlement, his sense of invincibility cracking in ways only time and circumstance could engineer. I didn't confront him with anger or malice. Instead, I used patience, strategy, and the quiet power of observation. Every conversation I had, every social event I attended, and every financial maneuver I made was calculated with precision. Nathan, blinded by rage and wounded pride, assumed he could anticipate me, but I was already 10 steps ahead. It began with the smallest things, a casual mention of a lucrative investment in a mutual acquaintance's company, a recommendation that landed the attention of influential circles. My reputation, long overshadowed by Nathan's louder presence, began to rise quietly, undeniable and untouchable. People saw me, admired me, sought me out, and every time Nathan noticed, or thought he did, he felt it as a sting he could not name. I also played on his weakness, his belief that he could control perception. I let him believe he was still the clever one, still the charming brother who could manipulate situations to his advantage. While he flailed, I quietly built alliances, expanded opportunities, and strengthened my position in ways invisible to him. It was poetry in motion, an invisible dance in which I always led. The sweetest moment came when I invited him, unsuspecting, to a gathering I knew he would attend. The room hummed with people who mattered, people he had long sought to impress. He strutted in with his usual arrogance, assuming he would outshine me, assuming the room would bow to him. Instead, he watched as I moved among the guests, laughing, sharing, commanding attention effortlessly. People turned toward me, asked my opinion, sought my advice. He flinched each time. "Do you see it, Nathan?" I asked him quietly later that night, leaning against the marble countertop of my kitchen. "Do you see what happens when you have to earn respect instead of demanding it?" He opened his mouth, faltered, and then walked away, slamming the door behind him. I didn't pursue him. I didn't need to. Every slight glance, every whispered comment he heard about me later, every invitation I accepted in the circles he once ruled, all of it was a quiet, relentless reminder. He no longer controlled the narrative. There were other measures, subtler still. I made sure business opportunities he relied on fell through not through sabotage, but through timing and connections he underestimated. I watched as his confidence faltered, seeing the carefully constructed ego crumble under its own weight. And I felt no malice, only the satisfaction that fairness, at last, was asserting itself. Late at night, I would stand on the terrace of my penthouse, the same terrace where he had screamed at me weeks ago. The city lights stretched endlessly, like a map of all the victories I had quietly accumulated. The sweet taste of revenge wasn't in his rue, and it was in my triumph, my calm, my refusal to let anger dictate my actions. I had transformed his fury into my own empowerment, and that was more satisfying than any confrontation. Nathan, of course, remained Nathan proud, stubborn, bitter, but the shift had happened. The world had changed around him, whether he admitted it or not. And in that silence, in that subtle collapse of his dominance, I felt a deep, quiet joy, because revenge, I realized, wasn't about destruction. It was about proving, to him, to myself, and to the universe, that I belonged, that I had always belonged. And in that knowledge, I was untouchable. The city had a way of holding memories in its corners, in the quiet glow of streetlights, in the shadows between buildings, as if it knew secrets we ourselves could barely bear to remember. I often found myself standing on the terrace of my Tribeca Penthouse at night, gazing out at the endless stretch of lights, thinking about the path that had brought me here. Nathan's fury, the accusations, the childhood rivalries, they all felt like echoes of a life I had finally stepped beyond. Nathan had withdrawn after that night at the gathering, humiliated not by my words, but by the undeniable truth of my success. I didn't gloat, didn't taunt. I let the world show him what he already feared. I could thrive without his approval, without leaning on family entitlement. Slowly, the people who once whispered his praises began to notice mine. And though he still carried his pride like armor, I could see it chipping, day by day, as life refused to bend to his expectations. I wondered about him sometimes, the brother I had loved and envied in equal measure. His jealousy had been raw, a tangible force that had shaped my own ambitions. And yet, I realized that my revenge, my subtle reclamation of respect and space, hadn't been about making him suffer. It had been about proving to myself that I was worthy, that I could build a life of my own, without stealing, without compromising, without apology. In the quiet moments, I allowed myself to feel both triumph and sorrow. Triumph for the independence I had carved, the victories that were mine alone, and sorrow for the relationship that had frayed beyond repair. Families are complicated, I thought. Love is rarely simple. And sometimes, to protect yourself, you must step away from those who cannot see your worth. Nathan never came back to the apartment after that night, though he continued to orbit my world in the ways only a brother could. I would see him at family gatherings, stiff, guarded, eyes darting to mine with something unspoken. Pride, regret, maybe a mixture of both, but I no longer waited for reconciliation. I had learned that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned, even from those who once believed they were owed it. And yet, I didn't feel bitter. I felt clarity. The penthouse was more than a home. It was a monument to perseverance, to quiet strength, to the patience required to let life unfold on your own terms. Every evening I stood on that terrace, feeling the city breathe beneath me. I was reminded of the nights I had dreamed of this, the small victories that had piled into something unassailable, and the quiet justice that had unfolded naturally, without cruelty, without malice, just inevitability. I had won, yes, but not because I had destroyed my brother. I had won because I had refused to let his rage dictate my life, and in doing so, I had built a foundation no argument, no scream, no inherited entitlement could ever shake. The city stretched before me like a canvas of possibility, and I understood then that life's sweetest revenge was often the one you didn't announce. It was the one that came in the form of success, poise, and unwavering self-respect. Nathan's anger was a memory, the penthouse a triumph, and I finally, fully was free. Because sometimes the greatest victory is simply living your truth while the world watches quietly in awe.